know him. You know him born to a mother and a father, born as a Roman citizen, given a Jewish name at birth of Saul, but operating with a Roman name as well as Paul. You know his story. You know he grew up going to the synagogue, trained at the feet of Gamaliel, growing and moving beyond his years in terms of the positions that he had with the. You know Saul and Paul. I don't have to go over that with you. And it seems like when Saul was in the world, so to speak, when he was operating in a church that had no social engagement, a church that had no connection with the people that it was supposed to be serving, when he was operating and killing the activists, good God from Zion, when he was slaying the Christians, the followers of the way, he was being promoted. He was being lauded. He was being celebrated. He was getting all kinds of invitations. He thought he was doing well because everybody was patting him on the back, Bishop. He thought he was big, large, and in charge. That's how we would say it if I was in South East. How you living? I'm living large and in charge. He thought he was the man. But things changed for him. I'm talking to somebody. The moment he got real with the Lord, the moment he got knocked on his, well, I'm not in Southeast, so I won't say it, knocked on his behind and had to look up and be humbled and realize that there was a God that was bigger than he ever imagined God could be. When he got on the track that God truly had him to be on, that's when things in the world start turning against him. He was no longer getting invited to preach everywhere. I wish I had 3 people that could say amen. Everybody wasn't celebrating him. Everybody wasn't lauding him. His name was not held in such high esteem. As a matter of fact, he ends up in jail for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. He didn't get no special anniversaries. He ends up on death row, in a dungeon, in a prison cell. And here in this passage, his son in the ministry, the one that he laid his hands on and acknowledged his calling and told his mother and grandmother that this boy is going to be somebody's preacher. That this boy has the gifts of the Spirit in him. You know, he said, fan into flame the gifts that are within you. Exhaust the fullness of your ministry. This is Paul's protege, Timothy. And Timothy was excited to learn under Paul, because when Timothy heard about Paul, Paul was the man. But now that he has been locked up, Timothy don't seem all that excited. I'm in the Bible according to the passage. And if you allow me to use my sanctified imagination, I'll run on through this, we'd be done. Can you see one bright Saturday morning? Timothy decides to go up to the state penitentiary to visit his incarcerated pastor and mentor. He slides on through the first level of metal detector, takes off his watch and takes his cash and his change out of his pocket, puts them in the locker. I wish I had somebody to know what I'm talking about. After putting them in the locker, he waits by the phone for them to call him and tell him it's okay to pass on through. Yeah. I know y'all ain't never been to jail, but here I is. And so he gets the call. Okay, you're clear, you can come. He comes through, is escorted to a seat in front of a glass that separates him from the incarcerated folks. Yeah. And his beloved pastor, his bishop, if you will, is escorted into the room, shackles on his feet, handcuffs on his wrist behind his back, and he shuffles over to the seat on the opposite side of the glass. The officer unlocks his handcuffs. Paul looks out at Timothy, but for some reason today, Timothy is not looking back at Paul. He's looking down. Paul lifts up the phone, puts it to his ear, expecting Timothy to do the same, but Timothy is still looking down. He hasn't looked up one time into the eyes of his mentor, his pastor and his bishop. And so Paul taps on the glass. Timothy looks up. Paul points to the phone. Timothy picks it up. And Paul simply says, son, what's up? You don't seem like yourself today. What's going on, son? Timothy looks down. Says, well, Pastor, I'm all right. I'm just, going through some stuff and trying to think about ministry and those kinds of things. He said, look at me. Timothy looks at his mentor, and even though they're separated by that bulletproof glass, the gaze that his mentor gives him still has the same impact as it always has. There, Paul, the mentor, looks into the eyes of the younger Timothy, the mentee, and he says, son, lift up your head. Don't you dare be ashamed of me. Don't get it twisted, son. I know you could have been mentored by T.D. Jakes. I'm sorry. I know you could have been mentored by somebody with a big church. I know you could have been mentored by somebody who was on tour, by somebody who had a book deal, by somebody who was head of the convention. God didn't choose to do it that way. He hooked you and I up because I first saw the gift in you. And I know it has not turned out the way you thought because it didn't turn out the way I thought it would turn out. But don't be ashamed, son, of where I am, because I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed because I know, God from Zion, I know that my God will never, ever fail me. And even though I'm locked up and confined, I'm in here for the cause of the gospel. And son, I'd rather be locked up for the gospel than free and living for everybody else. And I just want you to know, son, this, good God from Zion, this is what faith looks like. It may not always be shiny. It may not always be rosy. It may not always be up. There are going to be some downs, but you got to believe in the God who called you in the first place. And I stopped by to tell the 21st century church that if we're going to make it through these turbulent times, if we're going to be able to survive 45, and we're going to survive them, let the church say amen. If we're going to be able to survive the KKK resurgence, if we're going to be able to survive all of the gentrification and all of the things that are happening in Camden and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and in cities across this nation, we are going to have to get back to some good old-time religion. We're going to have to get back to faith. We're going to have to get back to loving God with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, with all of our souls. And we're going to have to teach our children what faith really looks like. Faith might not have a whole bunch of bling bling. Faith might not have Bishop Jones furs every winter. Faith might not have convertibles, BMWs, and Mercedes Benzes. And I'm going to throw the car I like in there, and beautiful Cadillacs. It may not have that. Faith might look like a Yugo. Faith might look like a Kia. Faith might look like a Hyundai. But if God be for you, he's more than the whole world against you. We've got to teach our children what faith looks like. So Paul, talking to his son Timothy from a jail cell, says, I know that faith still matters even in my confinement, even in my predicament, even in these environs. First, because I know in whom I have believed. Said, I know in whom I have believed. This knowledge is not formal education. Though we ought to value formal education. And we ought to get as much as we can. Somebody ought to say amen. Education still matters. Somebody ought to say amen. But education, formal education alone won't get it. Paul is not talking about a set of data points. He's not talking about something he got downloaded from some application somewhere. But Paul is talking about experiential knowledge. He says, my faith matters because here it is. I have an authentic relationship with the Lord. Yeah. Some of us are trying to make it on grandmama's faith, and grandmama had strong faith. Somebody's trying to make it on granddaddy's faith, and granddaddy had strong faith. But I stopped by to tell you, unless you know for yourself, you got to know that you know that you know that you know that God will make a way somehow. I wonder, have I got any witnesses in the house today? Faith only matters when it is authentic. Reminds me of a man who worked as a janitor on a college campus. And he would clean the buildings and the lecture halls. And one particular day he went to work and they were giving a great lecture. It was crowded. And he usually would come in a few minutes before the lecture ended so that he could get right to busy cleaning it up for the next event. And so while he made his way in and collected his brooms and his assortment of tools and equipment to clean the room, he heard the closing questions of the lecturer. And this particular lecturer was well known for his thoughts about religion and for his anti- or atheist views as it related to religion, theology, and God himself. And so he said that there is no God. God is a figment of the human imagination. He is a creation of our own thought process. And when the old man, who didn't have much education, heard that, he did something he hadn't done in the 30 years he was working on that campus. He raised his hand to ask a question. Way back in the back of the room there, he stood by the doors that they would exit from. And believe it or not, the great lecturer saw him, and he looked back there. He said, "Sir, are you raising a question?" He said, "Yes, I'm raising a question." He said, "Are you faculty here?" He said, "No, I'm not faculty. I'm just a janitor." He said, "Well, how could you possibly have a question for me, being just a janitor?" He said, "Well, I still have a question if you don't mind." He said, "Well, this will be the last question. What is it?" The old man pulled an apple out of his pocket and bit into it, chewed it a little while, and then the lecturer got a little impatient. He said, "Sir, excuse me, if you have a question, please ask it." He said, "Oh." Then he swallowed, and he said, "Sir, this apple I just ate, can you tell me, was it bitter or was it sweet?" The lecturer looked at the man and said, "Sir, we really don't have time for riddles and for games. For obviously I cannot tell you whether or not the apple that you just ate was bitter or sweet because you ate it." He said, "Well, if you can't tell me whether or not this apple I just ate is bitter or sweet, how can you tell me how good Jesus is?" And I stopped by to tell you, we need some people that know for yourself because of what you experienced that he's so sweet. I know. It's experiential. It's authentic faith. And we've got to help our young people understand that when we have authentic faith, can't nobody tell us nothing because we already know him for ourselves. Is there anybody in here who can attest to the fact God's already brought you through too much? He's already brought you through too much. He's already brought you through too much for you to give up now. Authentic faith.